So why do you believe you need to understand more about your business process? Is it about bottom line? Is it about a change in the way you want to operate your business? Is it about you looking for new things to achieve? Is it simply that you don't know?
Welcome to Process Pioneers, the show that takes a deep dive into the minds of decision makers, key influencers, and process experts who are pioneering the world of everything process.
Welcome to another episode of Process Pioneers. This morning I have the absolute privilege of sitting down with Steve Marsh. Now Steve is a business improvement manager at the Western Sydney University and has been for around about 9 years now. Steve, thanks for joining me.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks for the opportunity, Daniel.
Now, something interesting I kind of stumbled across in your profile is that you're also an avid sporting fan, having been a soccer and gridiron coach.
Yeah, it's a long history that goes back to the age of 5 from playing soccer or football from where I originate from in England to the age of about 24, joining the ranks of American football. So my passion is both. Used to play for Manchester United at one time when I was a teenager and played for Great Britain at gridiron. So, successful sporting career.
That's amazing. And just out of curiosity, are there any overlaps with the work that you're doing now in a professional context with process management, process improvement, change management? Are there any overlaps between what you're doing and sport?
Yeah, significant, really significant, perhaps more so in an American football or gridiron context to soccer, but both are very much bounded in systems of play and understanding how those systems operate. Yeah, particularly in, as you can imagine, in gridiron, where you've got at least 3 different teams that can be on the field at different times, performing different functions. And each individual within that team that's on the field at that time, again, has similar issues that they need to perform or things they need to be aware of in playing those sports. So there's an absolute similarity between process management, what you do in an organizational context, and how you can apply that or use it in a sporting context as well. Right.
And I'd say that there's a certain type of person that thinks in that way, or thinks from a process-centric sort of point of view that I guess they're naturally drawn to that, whether it's in a sporting team or whether it's in an organisation. If you have a process-centric outlook on life, you'll be constantly looking for the processes and how can we improve them, how can we change them, how can we make it better overall.
I tend to agree with you. In fact, I would definitely agree with you. It's quite interesting over a long and varied career that I've actually had that opportunity to now sort of stand back and reflect a little bit around those types of conversations and around that type of thinking. That for sure, there are a lot of people who really enjoy dealing with uncertainty and complexity and trying to understand why things are the way they are. And there are other people who just simply want to get on and do it. And there are even those people who don't even really care at all. And yet they're influenced by the processes of life and processes of business and organizations.
Yeah, right. So what might be good is if you take us back to the beginning of where your interest, I guess, first came from in talking about processes, business process management. Obviously, there was, I guess, a natural way you thought about life or tackled life. But talk about the moment where you had that interest in, and I guess you were able to articulate, oh, this is processes. I'm actually interested in this.
Yeah, that probably takes me back quite a number of years. In fact, my original profession, I actually became a chartered quantity surveyor. So I was actually working in the construction industry. So the whole notion of understanding how, if you like, components fitted together, the understanding of actually what a project management plan might look like, and then actually the detail of understanding how those things all fit together, the processes that you need to put in place, whether it be actually the construction side, whether it be manage a contract, whether it be ordering and goods and services, all of that is related to a process. And through that, I think, initial grounding, it started to give me a flavor and an understanding, not only to broaden my horizons, which I did beyond the construction industry, but actually a deeper need to understand process. And I'm actually a graduate of the Open University in the UK, and I actually studied around in my mid-30s to get my first degree, and that was all about systems, complexity in systems and process, and understanding the way people think, the way people interact, the way people understand the nature of systems and processes, and how we can actually influence that and actually add value to not only an organization, but individuals as well in terms of the work that they do. So that's really probably where the background really comes from. And it's probably very deep-seated from, that sporting background, that interest to really understand why we play the way we play and how we can actually influence and help others in a process context to get to where we want to be.
Great. And for someone listening right now that maybe they're in an organization that isn't very process-centric, they don't have a BPM framework or anything like that, but they've heard of BPM, they've heard of the many different definitions and descriptions, I guess, and the way people articulate it. But if someone came to you and asked, Steve, what is BPM to you, or how would you describe BPM?
Okay, well, that's a really good question in the context that has happened, and certainly in the organisation at Western Sydney that I'm working in now. And if I'm being honest, I think some of us who are practitioners or experts in a space like this often jump in straight into a language set that talks about BPM.
Right.
And to an individual who often doesn't either understand the term BPM as business process management or even understand what process is,
right,
it's, I think, puts you in at the deep end and leaves the person you may be talking with or teams in a position of what the, because you're actually talking a foreign language.
Right.
So really, you've got to really pick and unpack the nature of perhaps where an organization is at, perhaps the nature of the conversation you're having with individuals or teams, and distill that back to what is it that they want to understand and why do they want to understand it, and put that in a language set that suits them.
Right.
So, for example, at Western Sydney University back in 2016, we started a program of change, significant change. In fact, we really started in 2014. We initially reviewed all our internal divisions and streamlined those divisions, more restructured rather than necessarily process orientation.
Right.
But by the time we reached 2016, we realized that not only do we need to look at our internal divisional structures, we really need to start looking at our school-based structures and how they were organized. And we started to recognize the overlap and duplicity of process, of work that individuals undertook. And we set off on a journey of actually unpicking and unpacking all of that. In doing that, several things emerged. One was that most people didn't really understand process.
Right.
And if they did, the process was, well, this is how I do what I do.
Right.
If somebody else next door to me does it differently, well, that's what they do.
Yes.
So there's no concept of, let's say, singularity or understanding of process. There was no understanding of the impacts upon different individuals, different teams within one environment, the impact that would have on a third party outside of their environment where a process needed a handoff, for example, or moved into a different domain because there are different process owners, if you like.
Right.
So you really needed to stand back and go, okay, what is it that you really want to understand here? What are the fundamentals? Is it about that you don't understand how you do what you do? Is it about you don't understand why others are not responding to you in the way that you would anticipate as a result of what you're actually doing or the way they're actually interacting with you?
Right.
It's nothing really to do with a process management discussion or even about process. This is more about an understanding of why they are asking the questions they're asking.
Right.
Because once you've started to get that understanding and that founding, I then believe you've got the opportunity then to start to introduce some of the if you like, the language sets around what would it look like if you were actually able to map your process?
Right.
What would it start to look like if in mapping your process, you're in a position then to start to share that process with others and get their input and their feedback? Now, the only word I'm using here is process. I'm not talking about anything about continuous improvement cycles. I'm not talking about anything about business execution of that process, how that might influence the workflow. We've not even gone there. We've just started that open, gentle conversation. In fact, if I can say, I've actually learned something really valuable for me from Chris Anderson from TED.
Right.
Chris did a presentation about innovation and innovation in terms of the web. And one of the tenets that he actually started to talk about was crowd, light, and desire.
Right.
And I've used that time and time again in the conversations I've had around our process management journey at Western Sydney. in the context of, for me to be able to get an interest and a passion to want to do something different, I needed to build a crowd, exactly as Chris talks about. To build a crowd, you need to start to talk about the stories. Not only talk about your stories, but more importantly, understand the stories of others.
Right.
And then start to bring those stories together across the organization. And that is exactly how we started our process management journey. We did not even talk about process. We just simply got people in a room talking about what worked, what didn't work, and why it didn't work.
Right.
And we started to document that. That started to shed the light on the problems that existed, but also shed the light on the opportunities that might exist for others and themselves to join a journey to do something different.
Right.
So creating the crowd and continuing to build the crowd, which we have over the last 4 years, continue to shed the light. And I can talk a lot more in detail a little bit later in this interview, if you like, around how we started to do that. We started to build the desire.
Yes.
And it's not until you can create the desire for doing something different and a desire to get involved in, say, process management or change or dealing with a particular matter at hand, that you really put yourself in a position to actually then bring out, if you like, the guns and bring out, the philosophy, the methodologies, and starting to upskill and train people in a different way of thinking and a different way of working. So
Yes.
That whole notion of crowd-like desire is absolutely a tenet for me, and I've found it's worked time and time and time again.
Right. And I think it's so important to do that well, as in when bringing people on into that journey, as you're talking about, you have to pitch it or present it in a way that speaks to them. You can't go in there and use all of the technical language that you understand and maybe the other BPM experts understand. But if you're trying to bring some that person along for the journey, whether it's senior management or just the general employee, because you obviously need to get buy-in from senior management, but then the general employee, they're the ones that they're actually having to go will have to go through the change. If there's a change to the processes, if there's a change in the way they consume the processes, then that you need to get buy-in from them as well.
Absolutely, and if I can, this is where really I like to link things like change management and the importance of change management in a process of actually adopting change.
Right.
We're asking people to adopt or adapt. We really need to get to a position where people are comfortable with the idea that they will want to change, which is a desire part.
Yes.
Again, it's bringing back almost the ADKAR model for process management. Create the awareness and create the desire, and then you start to build the knowledge that fits around that. And it's the knowledge and ability that then drives your ultimate change, and then putting in place a series of steps to continue the reinforcement journey to ensure that the change actually sticks. So, again, if I use crowd-like desire and I think about ADKAR as a model for change, in truth, again, what we're really dealing with here is not necessarily about process management per se, but what we're trying to do is introduce a way in which we can bring people along a journey that it makes it much easier when we come to adopt and adapt the use of process management and adopt and adapt the way in which we do our business. Becomes much easier because people are wanting and are desirous of wanting to do something.
Yes, yeah. And did you have the luxury of coming into an organisation that already had a very process-centric methodology or a BPM framework in place, or was this something that you were part of pioneering?
If I'm being brutally honest, at Western Sydney University, I think, and I wouldn't be talking out of school here, that we definitely were not in a process management mindset. That would be unfair to me to say that there weren't areas of the university that were and continue to be. But if I think about it in an organizational context, and I'd suggest that this is not just Western Sydney University, I'd actually suggest very strongly in many, many organizations, and particularly large organizations that have high levels of bureaucracy, that you tend to be in a position of, we do what we do what we need to do, and we just do it.
Yes.
Now, where that leaves us in a position of, if you think from a policy and procedural perspective at an organizational level, is that you leave yourself open to just constant interpretation, almost individual by individual. And when you reach that point, all of a sudden what you get is this process locked in people's heads. There's no real documentation. It's all domain knowledge. And I found, as we did in 2016 when we started our transformation journey that we're still on, that was a big issue. One of the reasons why is that we initiated a program to allow staff, if they chose to take an early retirement. And if they, in doing so, we lost a number of key staff. And that was before we started the process of change.
Right.
We didn't recognize, perhaps to the fullest extent at that time, was that a lot of that process documentation was locked in people's heads. And when they left, and then we reorganized and restructured around our organization, we were left in this big hole of, now who does that? And how does that get done? Because unfortunately, the knowledge had walked out the door.
Yes, right.
So it's an important thing when you're starting to consider a journey of change or transformation, and particularly in a process context, is to certainly upfront get an appreciation within your own organization of exactly where you stand in relation to your documented processes. Whether they're good, bad, or indifferent doesn't really matter, but it's an understanding that I think is critical at the juncture of time of starting a process management journey.
Right, right. And I think some organisations, they have been left with a sour taste in their mouth when talking about documenting processes. I guess because maybe they did that initiative 5 years ago. It was documented down in whatever form, but then it kind of just sat there collecting dust. And I guess it wasn't continuously managed or improved because the people still had the knowledge in their head. And if there were no changes, then why would I have any need to relook at the processes? So talk to us a bit about that.
Yeah, I think that's a fundamental failing in my mind's eye of how we go about engendering process management or embedding such a methodology or an approach within any organization. I've certainly worked in organizations in the past where we've gone down the pathway of documenting process. And just like many organizations that build business plans, strategic plans, finance plans, okay, well, we've actually gone through a process to develop it. So now it sits on the shelf for a year and we don't actually either refer to it, enact it, or even recognize that we actually did it in the first place. So I think the fundamental here is actually when you start that journey is to make it very clear is what's the outcome? What's the end result that we're looking to achieve by actually doing what we're doing? So whether if it's about documenting process, that's fine, but what is the outcome we're really trying to achieve here? And setting out some clear milestones or some clear process steps around how we do that. And I'd be quite happy to share with you a couple of documents with you if you want around that, around how we at Western Sydney University are seeing ourselves in that space to ensure that we don't end up with documented processes that simply sit on a shelf and people go, we've done it.
Yes, great. I reckon let's dive into that now. I think now that it's come up, let's have a talk about that. And if you want to share your screen.
Yeah, I'll share my screen with you if I can. So bear with me just a sec.
Great. I think the people listening, I think they'd love to get an insight into this.
Okay, we're running a little bit slow here. Here we go. From the beginning. So, simply put, what you see on this screen here did not exist probably 2 years ago.
Right.
So, in fact, in truth, 18 months ago, we as a university recognized that we needed to make some significant transformations, having, if you like, re-engineered or restructured certain parts of our organization. What we now needed to do is bring in that supporting infrastructure, both in technology terms and business terms, in terms of our process around how we could actually move forward and get out of that cycle of, hey, we've done it, so we can now sit back and relax.
Right.
My program, or our program of ways of working at Western, around enterprise process management is actually embedded now within a program that is called Western Now. And our Western Now project is about improving our workflows across our entire organization, of which the ways of working at Western and our process management program is an important underpinning piece. We built it around 3 key themes, which I think is fundamental, going back to your original question, Daniel, about the notion of we just do process and we leave it, or why are organizations in a position of not really understanding what they do and why they do it. We discovered the same, but what we've actually identified is there's 3 key composites, and that is around ownership. If you can get someone to actually own and understand the nature of what they own in terms of process, It makes it much easier then in terms of onward management.
Right.
Secondly, in our organization, we're across something like 15 campuses. We've got over 3,000 staff, something like 45,000 students. Visibility then becomes incredibly critical to understanding what that process might be, how it might shape, and how you're involved and your ability to understand. So creating that visibility becomes critical. And the third composite really is around collaboration. Once we've actually identified our processes, quite often they're either centrally owned or possibly even locally owned. But when they're centrally owned, how do you then engender that collaboration across your business, where you do have handoffs in process steps, where you do have people with different ownership rights within a process, where you do have that, I can't do this and you do until you do that.
Right.
So building that collaboration and creating the absolute visibility of your processes on a continual basis, we've found brings us three elements clearly into play and allows us to go beyond that simply, here's a process, let's stick it on a shelf.
Yes.
If I move on, probably our big picture was we started to look at process management as an enterprise management tool from day one.
Right.
And one of the first things we did was try to get an appreciation of where we thought we were on the journey. And this is a map that reflectively probably looks at 2016, 2017.
Right.
So the current situation is where we started from in terms of that spider diagram. As you can see, there was clear leadership for what we wanted to do.
Yes.
When we start to look around that induction and performance, our communication strategy and our resourcing, again, we weren't quite clear. Quite frankly, when we started this journey, we had no strategic direction. What I mean by that is our entire approach to process management has been ground up.
Right.
When I started this whole journey, we had no budget. We had effectively two people. We still do in reality for an entire organization. And that's actually been a plus rather than a minus, if I'm being honest.
Right. Yep.
And we've actually built this from a ground up basis. So basically, I've taken the Nike approach. I'm just going to do it until somebody tells me to stop.
Right.
But the reality is, going back to the crowd-like desire conversation, I've been building since day one that opportunity to build a crowd. So continue talking about the opportunity and benefits, which you see on that sort of right-hand side of the slide. Why would it make a difference? How will it make a difference? How can we build this into our organizational mantra, if you like? And I've been very fortunate that with our enterprise service management project, I've now been able to embed and build this into that program, which is a recognized strategic focus direction for the university.
Right.
So where we want to be is obviously in the green zone. We're probably, in my opinion, maybe halfway.
Yeah. Okay.
I think we've still got a long way to go, but I think we've also achieved an enormous amount. So our journey really has been around four elements of a process framework. Our first thing has been to talk about process mapping. Then it's really been about process execution. Then we start to think about in process improvement cycles, moving into a genre then of ongoing continuous improvement.
Yeah.
And for our organization, that's been quite critical for us to really get our head around and understand, particularly with the process mapping part, because of what I outlined before around a lot of domain knowledge either lost through people leaving, or a lot of domain knowledge simply sitting in people's head because this is how I do what I do. That's taken a significant amount of time to get some groundswell. Right. We have that groundswell now through our endeavors in process management journey, and similarly from an enterprise service management perspective. So we're now starting to build out the crowd. We've got something like over 120 staff now trained across the organization using a tool called ProMap. We actually have adopted ProMap's approach to process management overall. Right. And we've got something like 600 processes now mapped sitting in our process management tool.
Right.
We've a long, long way to go with that, as you can imagine, an organization as large as us, but we are very much focused around our enterprise service management journey at this point in time.
Yes.
Where we're really at now is we're starting to get to a point where we're starting to see some of our workflow emanating out of our new system. So we're now into sort of getting into process mapping, process execution mode. So allowing those processes to be run, inverted commas, on a day in, day out basis as part of our workflow. And we've just really started to think about some process improvement activity one of the things that clearly is for us a problem and has been is no metrics. So very few metrics around how things actually are working or not working, allowing people to stand back and go, why are the things the way they are?
Yes.
I'm just going to jump to the next slide for a second, because I think what it allows you to start thinking about, if you're involved in a journey of, or thinking about embarking on a journey of process management, is we're seeing it in two waves. So wave one, as you see there, is about us building the crowd, shedding the light on what BPM is, starting to cultivate that desire and starting to enable some basic capability. And I think that's critical, going right back to your original point, Daniel, of people who don't know what they don't know. The last thing you want to do is bombard them with, here is a brand new methodology, here's how you go about doing it, here are all the tools, go away and get on with it.
Right.
It's got to be very much a supported journey, and one of understanding where your audience or where your participants or where those people who are going to get involved in process are actually at. So we've decided to build some very basic capability for staff, that 120 trained staff, and understanding what process is, understanding how it links together, and understanding how you can map using quite a good tool.
Yep.
To be able to then understand your process. The tool itself provides some fantastic ways of being able to create that visibility and openness, allowing that collaboration. And we've already seen that time and time again, even in building our basic process maps at this time, which we're really calling our minimum viable product.
Yes.
So our wave two then becomes, okay, we now have process documentation. We've got our workflow starting to be enacted. We are actually building some metrics in the background that start to capture some information and data about how well that's working. We can now start to open up some dialogue now with our users of those systems and understanding those processes to actually move into, so how can you, are there ways we can, what would it look like if we did it differently? And that opens up that conversation around process improvement. But that's only process improvement. It doesn't move you into a continuous improvement cycle, obviously, until you start to do this on a repetitive basis. So again, that to us is going to be our third part of the journey. And that's why I think it's critically important that you don't just simply go, here it is, here's a tool, here's the functionality, go for it, guys. And you stand back and go, well, we've now got process management across our organization.
Right.
I think the last slide that I've got is really around the journey overall and from project mode to BAU mode. And I think this is, again, critical in any organization that's looking to embark on a process management journey. Yeah, the ultimate aim is to discover, and that discovery is going back to my crowd-like conversation in one way. The desire starts to build that, the enabling, that planning, because you're starting to think about who, the how, the what. Your enablement is obviously the knowledge side of things on how you can train people up. We get to execution and engagement, which starts to build us into our improvement and continuous improvement cycles as we start to move forward. And that takes you out of project mode and moving into what we should be doing every day as our normal business. And hopefully over the next maybe 12 to 18 months, not only will we have staff that are subject matter experts in the domain that they're actually working within, but hopefully they've got a level of subject matter expertise in understanding how they can make it better and how they can improve it through a journey of process management.
Right.
So those are the slides.
No, that's great. Thanks for sharing that.
It's a pleasure.
I think, the people that'll be listening or like seeing the video, because we'll definitely display these slides so that people can kind of follow along with what you're talking about. I think they're going to glean a lot of value from that. But what would be the first steps that, like, obviously you laid it out there in wave one, wave two, for some people that they're in an organization that there is no focus on process documentation or management. What's that first conversation that they should be looking at having, or what are the first steps that they should be taking, and which people should they be looking at getting on board or presenting this to?
I think you start with the why question. Like all things in life, it's the why. Why do you actually want or feel the need or the value or the importance of understanding what you do?
Right.
And that why actually opens up a whole range of conversations in a business context. So, for example, if you're dealing with a senior manager, chief executive, it could be around, so why do you believe you need to understand more about your business process? Is it about bottom line? Is it about a change in the way you want to operate your business? Is it about you're looking for new things to achieve? Is it simply that you don't know?
Right.
if you're talking to them, the other end of the scale is someone who's actually working on a day in, day out basis around a process. The why can be, why? I'm frustrated. Why? Because other people don't respond the way I expect them to respond to the things that I do. Why? So it's almost a 5 why conversation. I think you've got to temper that conversation depending on who your actual audience is and get to appreciate and understand what's driving them to want to see something different. If they can't see something different, the conversation can become the what if. So, okay, you're telling me that, it takes 3 times longer than you believe it should be to do this differently. What if we actually start to look at that and explore how that might shape up?
Right.
It takes, again, away the conversation of just talking about, let's go map your process. The last thing that people want to hear is that story, in my opinion. I think the first thing they want to hear is you understand their problem.
Yes.
Being able to understand someone's problem, then as the subject matter expert, you can start to bring in the solutions. And those solutions might be that conversation around process.
Yes.
And that puts you on the journey, going back to my original slide of, well, what if we could look at mapping your process? Well, what if we could actually bring other people into the process itself and get them to be part of your journey? What if we could actually create greater visibility around what you do and how you do it? And how would that actually start to shape up in terms of how you might see things being done differently?
Right.
I think that's the kind of conversation I tend to have and like to have. I don't want to just walk in through the door and say, hi, my name's Steve Marsh. I'm the business improvement manager, and I'm going to actually teach you how to write processes. Because that's usually the doom to failure approach of what I would believe, not only about process management, but any kind of management approach, full stop. And again, I critically call out the need to get involved with people. The people are what do, we are the doers, we are the achievers, we are the people who make it happen. And unless you really can actually connect with people in the first instance, it just makes your journey that much harder.
Yes.
If we could just sort of walk in through the door and say, we're now introducing a business process management program across the entire university, and you will be engaged very shortly to join a journey. That's the doing to people. My personal view is you must do with people.
Right.
And to do with people, you've got to bring them on a journey.
Right. And I guess for some people or for some organizations, that you really do need that person to facilitate that conversation of, I guess, looking for the pain points. Because I guess in some cases that the pain points would be well understood. I guess in other cases, there would be this sense of there being a pain point, but maybe the team or the individual doesn't know how to articulate that what they're trying to, I guess, what they're trying to change or fix, or maybe in some cases they're not even aware of the potential pain or the potential opportunity. Maybe there isn't necessarily a perceived pain, but maybe there's a world of opportunity there that they're just not seeing.
Yeah, look, the best way I can describe that is some instances where I've had those types of conversations. I don't know why, I don't understand why. And as stupid as it may sound, but I think if you're a good process manager, you would probably take on board this very initial concept of, okay, let's go find a whiteboard, let's get some sticky notes, and let's do nothing else except you just document on the board with sticky notes what you believe is the situation. It doesn't really matter where you start that journey, whether it's about process or it's just about not being comfortable with a scenario or people or whatever, it doesn't matter. But what it does allow you to do is understand the story as an initial starting point. And I think that's critical when you start a journey of process management in the way you describe, where people are unsure, uncertain, not clear. What it allows you to do is let them tell you their story in a documented way that you can then capture. Now, I've done that a number of times, and we as part of our training program in process management, that is our starting founding point, is we get people to use sticky notes, actually write down what they think their process actually is. And often if we're working with a team, we'll actually get individuals to do that one by one. And guess what? We then share that journey. Yes. And it's the sharing of the journey that starts to tease out what you've just described. The aha moment comes along. You do it this way, and you do it this way because. Right. What we naturally start to do is get people talking about what they do, why they do it. It starts to tease out those pain points. it's, it could simply be that I do it, use my left hand, you do it with your right hand. And the fact of the matter that we both do different hands means we've actually got two different processes.
Right.
But just simply recognizing that allows people then to go, so when you hand this off with your left hand to my right hand, I need to, and so we start to tease out pain points, problems, whatever they start to be. That allows you then to start to, okay, well, what if we actually now document this into a more formal sense, a really high level, very basic process workflow, could even be, tier 0 type stuff, and just getting an understanding at that level. And once you've done that and you get people to start to understand that, and you can do that again with sticky notes.
Right.
Without even documenting this in that formal context, but sticky note it. Once you start to get that, then you can start getting into more of the vertical, the depth of what is actually going on within each step. And as you're building that journey, you're reinforcing the message and the confidence for the individual or a team or an organization that they're beginning to genuinely understand what they do and why they do it, which starts to answer the question they started with, which is, I don't understand the why, I don't understand the what. And I think that's the best way, in my opinion, to actually start to engender, if you like, a more formal approach to process management down the track. It's been incredibly successful for us at Western Sydney, incredibly successful. And I think it's very much because we've taken the time upfront at the initial phase to engage people not in a process management journey, not even in an enterprise service management journey around documenting workflow and improving workflow, but actually just working with people to understand why they do what they do. Right. And do they see better ways of doing things? And if they're unclear and unsure, let's sit down, unpick and unpack.
Yeah, that's amazing. Now, Steve, I have 1,000 other questions I want to ask you, but we're going to have to wrap it up there. I'm sure that the people that will get to listen to this interview, they're going to be gleaning a lot from what we've been talking about, and also that presentation that you shared. So I just want to thank you for giving up your time today and sharing your knowledge with us.
It's been an absolute pleasure, Daniel, and welcome any future opportunities that might arise.